Hey folks, I'm brownbear. Today I'll be offering my analysis of Warcraft III Reforged, a remastered version of the classic 2002 real-time strategy game from Blizzard Entertainment. Last week I attended Blizzcon and spent a good chunk of my time playing the new Warcraft III demo. Warcraft III Reforged is an ambitious remake of the original Warcraft III, featuring fully rebuilt models of every unit, building, and environmental object. The developers have gone all out here, adding in new animations, re-recording all of the original voice work, and adding support for 4K resolution. On top of the fairly short demo, which showcased a single-player campaign mission called The Culling, I was also fortunate enough to attend a small group interview with the developers, where I got a chance to ask a bunch of deeper questions about the game's design. Not surprisingly, the most noticeable aspect of the remaster are the new graphics. I'll explain my perspective here by offering a comparison with another game called Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo-Kazooie is a 1998 Nintendo 64 title that was remastered for the Xbox 360. When I played through the remake, it felt exactly the same as my original playthrough from when I was a kid. But that's obviously not true if you look at the two experiences one after another. What happened is, when I was a kid, these were fairly standard graphics, so they didn't stand out to me as particularly dated. It's only through direct comparison that you notice a difference, an effect that's exacerbated by the cartoony artistic style. Reforged feels exactly the same way to me. It looks exactly as I remember it 15 years ago, but that's just a testament to the developers' efforts to respect the original art style. If you compare the two experiences side by side, it's quite easy to tell the difference. I'll quote directly here from the developers to highlight some of the technical advances. For the art, it opens up a lot of things. We're getting today's standards of PVR lighting, physically based rendering, metalness and reflections, real-time shadows, and everything like that. The developers also highlighted the tremendous increase in polygon count. Character models in the original game sometimes featured as few as a couple hundred polygons, whereas the remastered versions feature between 10 and 15,000. They also mentioned the addition of shaders and ray tracing. The facial animations in particular stood out to me because they reminded me of the animation work in StarCraft II. There's one quote in particular that I wanted to highlight from the panel discussion. After we worked with a little bit of style, a little cartoony, we noticed that a lot of the games out there have that kind of similar style. A lot of games are doing that more cartoony look. And so we took a step back and we said, you know what? What really speaks Warcraft to us? So we went back to the drawing board and we took Mists of Pandaria as our base and we redid the orc until we got to a point where we really liked him. Here we see a clear decision point. Given the choice between working toward what's popular on the market versus sticking to the original vision, the developers wisely chose the second. This matters a lot because a remaster is not the same thing as creating a brand new game. Fans have expectations from their original playthroughs, and it's not fair to sell them down the river in order to reach a new audience. The developers discussed in some detail how they were going about this. Reforged leverages a two-layered development model. The underlying game engine remains largely the same, preserving the original gameplay and enabling cross-compatibility between the SD and HD versions. Next, a new rendering engine was built on top, enabling modern engineering techniques on areas that don't affect gameplay. Where this is particularly interesting is the animation work. Certain animations have no gameplay impact. The developers called out idle animations as one example, noting that this is something they could iterate on thanks to the layering of two engines. But in other cases, like unit attack animations, making changes would impact the gameplay. Here's what they had to say about this. Where we are limited is, because of this cross-play compatibility with the SD version, is the frame counts. This animation is 20 frames, and it's gotta stay 20 frames. This is the animation, this is what it does, this is how long you have to do it. So those kinds of limitations are what we're working with. And we know if we change attack animations, increase the length, shorten up the length, that's going to have an impact, kind of a waterfall impact just from the fundamentals of the balance. And we don't want to start from that place, because then everything kind of goes sideways. All of the learnings of the past 15 years get unwound because we've started poking in too many different places. This is something that I paid particular attention to while playing through the demo. I tested out various user interface features to see if they had been updated, and in general the experience stuck closely to the original game. The unit selection cap was still in place, as was the relatively outdated pathing. Unit AI was similarly basic, lacking features like smart building from the SCVs in StarCraft II. I asked the developers about their philosophy in this area. To start with, it's don't break the game. That's the basic. Now that we've announced it, we now want to go to the next step. Okay, help us understand where's that line at, and engaging in those dialogues. We start from a place of known good fun, and then evolving fun is that back and forth active dialogue with the community. We did do some things around the user interface and so forth to try and open up the field of view, make it feel less occluded so that you're not just looking at like half the screen of the actual gameplay action. and some of those are just experiments, they're just that. We may decide that we don't like that and we'll go back to the existing console. We may go even further. I think this is a healthy approach, with the emphasis on additional balance changes and a generally more ambitious goal relative to StarCraft Remastered. It makes sense to keep the door open to larger gameplay changes. But you simply can't do that effectively unless you start from the default perspective of not changing anything. Otherwise, you're just demonstrating that you don't understand why the original game was so successful. Too many people forget that UI limitations were often intentional. Here's a quote from Patrick Wyatt, an early Blizzard developer, discussing the cap in Warcraft I. After many design arguments between team members, we decided to allow players to select only 4 units at a time, based on the idea that users would be required to pay attention to their tactical deployments, rather than simply gathering a mob and sending them into the fray all at once. We later increased this number to 9 in Warcraft II. Command & Conquer, the spiritual successor to Dune 2, didn't have any upper bound on the number of units that could be selected. The developers underlined this point later in the interview, confirming a dedicated balance team and discussing their collaboration with former competitive players. We want to tread cautiously with this. We don't want to do something that's just going to completely upturn the apple cart, because it is a broad community, and it's something we want to make sure we're preserving and helping to extend. In general, I'm really happy with the level of respect the developers are showing to the game's original fans. And this isn't isolated to the competitive multiplayer either. As part of the World Editor revamp, the developers went out into the modding community and actively solicited feedback, even hiring some folks to work on the game directly. Blizzard even hosted a Warcraft III summit for members of the community, ensuring they're getting plenty of feedback from the core Warcraft audience. That all being said, there is one change I think should be made, specifically with regards to the netcode. I asked the developers whether Reforged would support dedicated servers. Here's what they had to say. We have some light routing technology based on non-custom games that for the most part has largely been there, but it's not a server-hosted model. It fundamentally relies on peer-to-peer. But that's still something we're actually actively discussing. What is the longer-term model? And that may evolve over time as well. I'd like to humbly propose a network architecture more similar to StarCraft II. In StarCraft II, a player in Europe playing on the European server will always have a good connection, regardless of who they play against, thanks to the use of dedicated servers. By contrast, a pure peer-to-peer architecture causes both players to lag if the connection between them is bad. This leads to an inconsistent experience in which players could have good latency in one game and then poor latency in the next. If Blizzard wants to guarantee a good gameplay experience, they should consider moving to a dedicated server model. I'm glad they're open to feedback here and hope that they make this change before release. Next, we'll talk a bit about some of the new features. First up is the new console. While the developers noted that Reforged will support the original console, the demo version defaulted to a slimmed-down, higher-resolution version. To be honest, I don't really know what to make of this, so once again I'll use an example from another game to explain what I mean. Age of Mythology HD is a remastered version of another 2002 real-time strategy game. One of the easiest ways to see this is by looking at the console. It doesn't look like it was redone for a wide screen. Instead, it looks like the developers simply picked up the original console and placed it onto a higher resolution. These gaps on the side don't make any sense. The icons are too small, and the text spacing looks a bit off. When you compare it to a console that was natively designed for widescreen resolutions, you can immediately tell the difference. There's no wasted space, and everything looks intentional. Reforged looks a lot like it took the original console and just kind of guessed at what it should look like at a higher resolution. This produces a lot of the same effects as Age of Mythology HD, like spacing that doesn't look right and proportions that don't make sense. The buttons are also way too small and quite difficult to click on, both for the inventory and the command card. In general, this seems like something the developers will need to fix before release. I think a better model of how to approach this is StarCraft Remastered. It's quite subtle, but the developers redid the artwork to fill in the gaps cleanly, enabling the same sized boxes, but still making the console appear as if it were natively built for widescreen monitors. There's a few other features worth mentioning. On the single-player side, the developers mentioned the addition of a new beginner mode for the single-player campaigns. I asked about support for old replays of famous tournament games, and they said they would support it. On the matchmaking side, they confirmed that the old-school leveling systems wouldn't be going away, but also that they were open to modernizing beyond that. Personally, I'd fill in the blanks here and assume they'll bring in a league system similar to StarCraft, but that's just speculation on my part. In general, I'm very optimistic about this game. One of the things I want to emphasize here is that the demo felt really enjoyable to play. The gameplay was fluid and rewarding, the graphical style clean, and the animation work reasonable. We'll see how the game develops over the next year, but all in all I'm quite happy with what I saw, and I'm eagerly awaiting more details. Alrighty, thanks for watching! If you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you followed me here, and on Twitter and Facebook to receive regular content updates. The relevant links are in the description below. All the best, and see you next time.